Hey guys, Tisha here, and we are back with another Love Times 3 chapter read. This one is going to be chapter 7. Hopefully, it's a lot lighter than the one that we read the previous day. I don't know, you guys. I did not mean to get so emotional on camera, but what they went through in that moment and the way that they were so open about it, I can appreciate that. I know some of you don't really like Joe. I'm probably going to do more of a little deep dive into him a little bit after we're done to see like some of the things that you guys are saying about what's on Reddit and things of that nature. But for right now, we're just going off of the Joe in this book. So, chapter 7 is entitled Sister Wives. The faults and weaknesses which are born in us are the enemies we are to grapple with, and those who have the greatest and can put them under their feet are the greatest conquerors and will wear the brightest crowns. This is Helen Mar Whitney, the plural wife of John Smith, and this is coming from And Why We Practice Plural Marriage. Plural marriage isn't easy. We're the first to admit that. It's a lifestyle that requires of each woman a constant, gentle empathy for her sister wives and respect for boundaries and fairness. Already, we are being told it's not easy, number one, that you have to have empathy for your other sister wives, something that I recall Nancy speaking about to the Browns about how they're not being empathetic, and even more so to Cody about how he wasn't being an empath. We face the same struggles that monogamous wives do, but those trying times are often magnified because there are multiple partners whose perspectives and feelings have to be considered. This way of life must be freely chosen to work. And once a plural marriage has been undertaken, healthy relationships are critical. There is no room for abuse or force of mistreatment. It starts with the husband and his character. So a good plural marriage starts with the husband and his character, which means the Browns were doomed from the very beginning because look who their husband is and look at his character. But what really makes success possible, it's that women who's agreed to take the journey with you, that sister wife. Alina. My daughter's death brought me closer than ever to my sister wives. They shared my grief and comforted me in a way that no one else could. Vicky and I had already experienced a great many highs and lows after living together for a decade, but my relationship with Val was fresh and fragile, and my daughter's death compressed the time it took for us to bond as a family. Val was tender and thoughtful during those dark days, knowing if without being asked when I needed comfort and a shoulder to cry on. Now, after our shared grieving, we had a history together and staying power for the future. But we still had a long way to go to be the family I'd always envisioned. I've always envisioned. I realized just how far several months after this investigation into my daughter's death ended. I've been out running errands and rushed into the kitchen with my arms full of groceries. "Where's Joe?" I asked Val, who was seated at the table. It was an innocent, reflexive question, just my way of checking in to see what's going on with the rest of the family. Val stared at me. "Why do you always have to know where he is every minute?" she asked with an edge to her voice. I was flabbergasted. In Val's plural marriage, every relationship, whether between Donald and a wife or between one wife and another, was compartmentalized. We were the complete opposite of that. Vicky, Joe, and I talked about and shared nearly everything, and that openness created problems for Val and me at first. In my earnest efforts to accept and include her, I was way too much for Val, too open, too inquisitive, and too involved. I didn't realize at first how controlling I was coming across to Val, and her mistrust that day in the kitchen was like a slap in the face. I had opened my life to Val, willingly agreed to share my husband with her, and now it feels as if she didn't even like me. At first, I was defensive, trying to explain myself to her, but then I began to examine my own behavior. After all, the whole point of living this way was to see how closely we could model Christ's teachings about love, acceptance, care, and compassion. And she was right. See, here she's being told something that she's done isn't making her sister wife feel comfortable. And because they looked at their dynamic across the board as a relationship, not just with their husband, but with one another, they really did take each other's feelings into consideration, which is something that we haven't really seen played out on the actual Sister Wives show. So this I can dig it. I tried harder to give her more space after that, and when I found it hard to cope with Val's mistrust, I would say a prayer, flip open the Bible or the Book of Mormon, and read whatever I found on the page to give me strength and comfort. Even so, it took time for us to understand and trust each other completely. We'd make it past one barrier only to bump up against another. It was the same growth process that creates the foundation of any long-lasting relationship. There are layers that rest on good times and layers that develop by getting beyond the bad. About 4 years after Val married Joe, she miscarried early in pregnancy. Joe was at a football coaching conference and couldn't be reached. Val and I were having a lot of friction at that time, but I decided to do everything I could to help her. Without worrying about being rejected or misunderstood, I went to Val's bathroom where she was bent over the toilet in great pain. She never miscarried before. Having experienced a miscarriage myself, I understood what she was going through. I sat beside her, my arm around her back, and talked her through it. The intimate hours I spent with Val in that crisis brought a new dimension to our relationship. That is nice that she could be there for her in that moment, because that is a traumatizing experience in more ways than one for a woman. And the fact that the husband couldn't be there, but she made sure Val was there for her cousin, because they are cousins, as well as her sister wife. That's nice. No words were spoken about it, but from that point on, Val and I seemed to be able to give our all to each other with no reservations. Does that mean everything was perfect? No. When people say, I practice polygamy, they've got it right. My efforts to live this life are constant and ongoing. There are many religions that have practices aimed at deepening spiritual insights and expressing faith, such as fasting, saying the rosary, and making a pilgrimage. That's what plural marriage is for me, a daily practice that focuses on my attention, on the highest ideals of my religion. The benefits to me in terms of spiritual and personal growth, joy, and completeness far outweigh the hard work and sacrifice it takes. My relationship with Vicky and Val is a hybrid found nowhere but in plural marriage. We have the closeness of sisters and the camaraderie of friends. I love it when I head for the kitchen late at night for a taste of chocolate and find Vicky or Val there, spoon in hand and ready for conversation. I find joy in knowing that the bond between sister wives often lasts beyond marriage. Val is still close to some sister wives from her first marriage. My older sister continued to live with her sister wife after their husband died, just as Joe's grandmothers did after their husbands died. As sister wives, we also have a unique respect for each other, a respect that is found among women in our culture who knew they loved the same man. It is that connection that prevents our relationships from being identical to that of sisters or friends. There are some things we just do not share with each other, mostly involving our private, intimate relationships with Joe. Absolute privacy on that issue is one of the unwritten rules of our plural marriage. Though I've seen that respect violated by sister wives, inevitably creating pain and damaging relationships. Not long after Val joined the family, we were having a girls' night out with a bunch of women. Some were plural wives and some married women from the outside culture. The laughs and conversation flowed freely, from raising children to the appropriate age to teach them about sex. Then the talk took a turn to marriage and wedding night experiences. A friend of mine shared some rather intimate details of her wedding night. Did anyone feel the same as me, she asked, looking around the room. Come on now, I shared. It's your turn. There was an awkward silence. I looked at Val across the circle of women, and her one raised eyebrow said it all. No way would we ever discuss our sex lives in front of each other, or with anyone else for that matter. Our intimate relationships are sacred. And what if something we said that got back to another wife? There was too great a responsibility that such talk might cause hurt feelings or feelings of inadequacy, or lead a wife to start making comparisons which are deeply a trap in plural marriage. A few women share their stories of their first experiences with sex, but plural wives kept silent. On the way home, I said to Val, "She sure didn't get it, did she? I can't believe that." "Nope," Val said, laughing. "That was clueless." When I entered plural marriage, I knew full well Joe would be intimate with other women, and I soon learned that would require me to respect certain boundaries in our distinctive relationships. I'm sure some of that understanding came from watching how my mothers interacted, but mostly it came to me the hard knocks way. Um, I I noticed that a lot of the people that we've been introduced to who are a part of polygamy do not discuss intimacy. And I'm not knocking it, for each his own. I am a monogamist and I don't see myself going out and discussing intimacy with everyone. But I feel like you should be able to have certain conversations with your friends. You know, you're not going to tell them all your business, like how great your man is. But you would share a little something, but they apparently don't share anything. Anyways, back to the book. Early in our courtship, Vicky and I agreed we would rotate sitting in the front seat to Joe whenever we went somewhere in his car. Sometimes Joe would reach over and take the hand of whoever was up front with him, a gesture that I always enjoyed. But one day, as I sat next to Joe, I reached for his hand. Oh Lord. Vicky was really upset I had done that, and later confronted me. "Why would you do that?" she asked. "I always wait for him to reach for my hand first." "I'm sorry," I said. "When I'm not the one in the front seat, I don't pay any attention to who initiates the hand holding. I just notice now and then that you're holding hands." Vicky had one expectation about what was appropriate and courteous when it came to public displays of affection, and I had another. As the example shows, we had to do a lot of talking to figure out our boundaries, and when Val came into the family, we had to mark the boundaries all over again because she had her own ideas and expectations. As a plural wife, I need intimacy with Joe that is mine alone, and I need my sister wives to respect that space. We share a great deal, but not everything. This unspoken policy extends to many aspects of our individual relationships with Joe. For example, when Joe and I go out on a date, we don't necessarily share our plans with Vicky and Val and vice versa. And afterward, I don't gush about what a great date we had or complain to them if something went wrong. But the reality is, we are all affected by what goes on in each relationship, from the good to the bad. See, the Browns try to act like their different relationships are supposed to be separate. And then later on, we're told things like if there's an argument, when he gets into an argument with Christine, then it trickles down to all the rest of us, which then means your relationships are not always separate. And here we have the Dargers letting us know that the good and the bad does trickle down into each other's relationships. When one relationship is going well, it can have a spillover effect, generally positive, on the other relationships. Conversely, if Joe and one of my sister wives are having a spat and he and I have a date that night, his mood will be affected. We don't interfere with each other's couples' disagreements, though we sometimes confide in one another about our individual problems. The fact is, each of us considers our relationship with Joe to be monogamous, which means that our family is at one level, does consist of 3 separate marriages. One marriage may be flourishing at the same time another marriage is fragile, which can affect the overall dynamic of the family. Sometimes I'm closer to Vicky and sometimes closer to Val. Our relationships shift depending on what's going on in each of our lives. As a family, we had a very difficult time when Vicky experienced severe postpartum depression after her 7th child. I sometimes felt she directed her resentment at me and turned to Val for comfort. She seemed so irritated with everything I did, but how was I supposed to change who I was? One night, as the 3 of us were talking, all my emotions bubbled to the surface and I broke down crying. Once I'd composed myself enough to form words, I poured out my heart. Vicky and Val both came over to me and hugged me for a long time. Having put down my defenses, I could see how alone Vicky was feeling. we were able to forgive, let go of the bad feelings, and move forward again with more empathy for one another. They may have held on to things for a short time, at least what we're hearing in the book, but they did eventually talk about it. And I feel like that's part of what we haven't seen with the Browns, is because here we are years later and Janelle is still holding resentments from things that happened in the beginning of her marriage with Cody. So these ladies are letting us know that things sometimes did fester, but they did eventually talk about it. During this time, I gave up some of my nights with Joe because Vicky's relationship with him needed attention. I'm married to both Joe and my sister wives. When their marriages succeed, mine is better too. It's the weakest link in the chain philosophy. The stronger each relationship becomes, the more strength we have as a family. Vicky, Val, and I also sometimes trade nights to accommodate happy occasions, a birthday or anniversary, or a special event involving one of the children. I bought tickets to see Kenny Chesney in concert months in advance, for example. The concert happened to be on a Friday night. When it turned to out that my night with Joe was on Sunday, Vicky willingly swapped nights with me. I love my time with Joe, but I also love my time without him. That's when I stay up late reading, take a class or interior design, go to a movie with my girlfriends or children, or just get a good night's sleep. I know myself. And if it were just the two of us, Joe and me, we would probably be taking each other for granted after 21 years of marriage. I don't know. There's a lot of people who've been married for a long time who make it work. I do feel like it's important to have your own autonomy, but you can do that and still be married. You can have date nights with your girlfriends and still be in a monogamous relationship. I've seen it done. I have family members that have been very successful at this. So I do feel like it can be done, even though she believes that this is the only way that works for her. As Joe's legal wife, I often attend public functions with him, but having this status has created its own set of accomplishments. There are times when I feel I cannot truly be myself with people who don't know the whole story of our lives. For example, if I'm with Joe at a business function and someone asks how many children we have, what's the correct answer? 7? 24? In the earlier years of our marriage, I really didn't know how to deal with this question. I had to adopt a facade. When I went with Joe on his business trips, hiding a big part of my life. One year, I accompanied Joe to a meeting in San Diego. We were the youngest couple there, and the wife of Joe's boss took a special interest in me, invited me everywhere with her. By the next trip, Joe's boss had learned we were polygamous, and his wife openly expressed her disdain for me. I was pregnant, and at the first luncheon with the other wives, she ridiculed me for having so many kids. I spent the rest of the trip by myself. As a plural wife, I often experienced emotional tug of war between having pride in my family and fearing I'd be ostracized if people found out how I live. If you don't like the way someone lives, it is not your job to criticize them, to ridicule them, to demean them. She didn't have to interact with her at all. There are people who I may not necessarily agree with their lifestyle. I'm not going to ridicule them. If they're doing something that I can feel like will put me in harm's way, then I'll stay away. But other than that, what she does in her home does not affect you. So who are you to come down on her? How did you go from being so interested in her and liking her to finding out she was a polygamist and now you want to ridicule her? This is why you have to watch what you say to people, because some people will check you. I make it my business to make sure that I am respectful because I know what the other side of me is like. I've done a lot of work to get to this point. So the fact that she did that to her and she didn't come back at her or, say something else, it shows how much control, even though she was hurt, that Alina had in the situation. I have never wanted Vicky or Val to feel bad or left out because I'm the legal wife. In the early years when Vicky and Joe and I were first married, Joe tried to balance things out by taking Vicky on separate trips, following a business trip with me. There were often times I would gladly have swapped the work trip for a pleasurable vacation on which I didn't have to worry about keeping secrets. When Joe changed careers and began dealing with a new group of associates, we decided Vicky would be the public wife. Eventually, we resolved it this way. I went on all the East Coast trips while Vicky went with him to meetings on the West Coast. We used similar strategies within our own community to mask our relationships with Joe, but despite those efforts, there have been times when I've been on a date with Joe and bumped into someone who previously met Vicky or Val in the role of wife. That requires some explanation. I am constantly thinking through what someone already knows about us before I say anything. I would hate to have to live my life worrying about something like that. It is such a relief when I'm in settings where I don't have to hold back and I can truly be myself. As I've gotten older, though, I find I don't care as much what others think about my family. I've evolved too. When it comes to conflicts, in the beginning, it was more about jealousy. Did Joe look at Vicky a little differently compared to the way he looked at me? Did he reach for Val's hand, sit closer to her, talk to Vicky more? The little things I used to take so personally don't bother me anymore. Now the conflicts are more about the annoyances inherent in any long-standing relationship and the logistics it takes to keep a family that consists of more than 24 people running smoothly. At this point, I hope we're beyond any chance of failure, but I am often asked, what would happen if one of us left a marriage? We believe that our commitments are sacred and that we should do everything possible to avoid divorce. But we all share the view that if one wife let the rest left, sorry y'all, does it? Yeah, it does. If one wife left the rest, then the rest of us would have an obligation to support her and her children instead of try to rip them out of their property and have them sign it over for $10, and instead of trying to have them sell their home and give them proceeds, they would make sure that they support that wife and their kids, as they should. A friend once told me Joe was lucky to have 3 wives who like each other so much and get along so easily. There's no question it was helpful that Vicky, Joe, and I were able to create a family culture from the inception of our marriage, and that Val adapted to it readily when she joined us. The fact that we are all roughly the same age also aided in our compatibility. Having twins as sister wives isn't a big deal to me. There are things Vicky and Val understand better about each other than I do, and they have a family history that will never include me. Yet there's a side of each of their personalities that is a perfect match with mine. For Val, it's fashion sense, and for Vicky, it's organization skills. But luck has nothing to do with it. With the success of our marriage, our relationship is the result of commitment and hard work. It's a result of good communication and not letting resentments build up, of being willing to consider someone else's point of view and respecting boundaries. I'm human. I make mistakes. But if I'm really trying to be the best I can be, I have found that love has boundless capacities to grow. And when I love, it comes back to me in even greater amounts. I've made this choice. I want these challenges. I love Vicky and Val. They are the family I've always hoped for, the family I worked so hard to achieve. If one of them were missing from my life, I would feel incomplete. That sounds like what we've been told sister wives are. Okay, let me keep reading. Vicky. I like to compare my decision to live the principle to climbing Mount Everest. From the minute I decided to do it, I knew it would be a challenge, but I was excited to see what I could conquer. I drew courage from the examples of those who succeeded. I could see that the experiences changed them forever. I knew others who tried and given up, and even some who'd lost their faith in attempt. At times, I've been afraid, unsure if I would make it, but I am still forging ahead. When I reach the summit, I may be tired and full of aches and pains, but I will have a great sense of accomplishment. Plural marriage, for me, is about overcoming weakness and selfishness, about having compassion for others, and about relying on the Lord in daily life. It is sometimes a pain to have to consider what everyone else, my tongue, in the family wants, from where to hang a mirror in the house to how we interact with Joe in public. It's easy on the good days and nearly impossible on the bad ones, but that's the life I've chosen. I try to stay focused on what will benefit me eternally, and that's not likely to be an extra 10 minutes with Joe now, or getting upset because he loves someone else just as much as he loves me. In fact, the first year of our marriage, I felt awkward anytime Joe showed affection to Alina in front of me. If I walked into a room and they were huddled together close in conversation or hugging, I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do. Some plural wives make it clear that they never want to see affection between their husband and another wife. But I realized that if I tried to squash these displays, I might miss an opportunity to know a whole different side of Joe, the real Joe. I had to let go. I had to trust. I had to accept. To me, that doesn't mean settling for less. Alina, Val, and I believe we are Joe's eternal soulmate, but we consider each other to be soulmates too. It's that belief in our female connection that drives our commitment to each other and gets us through those times. Our friendships and love have grown over the years to the point where the little jealousies are far outweighed by the knowledge that my sister wives always have my back. But jealousy is an unfathomable emotion, one that can surface for no apparent reason and stage an attack when you least expect it. It can be the result of a misunderstanding or rooted in the realities of plural marriage. A great personality can set it off, so can physical characteristics. I've had jealousy triggered by pretty ordinary seeming aspects of living the principle. A look Joe gave someone else, an occasion when he slept late into the morning with another wife, and times when he seemed to go on more dates or to have the better connection going on with one of my sister wives. I appreciate their honesty. It is extremely refreshing than the, oh, we fell in love, we found a spark, and we had a little complications. We argued about the dishes and stuff, but we just pushed it under the rug and kept forging. No, they're being honest about some of the things that they face. Now, I know they're not giving us everything, but this is giving me more, and we're only like halfway through the book. It's giving me more insight already into this family than I feel like we got with the Browns bestseller. I guess I was a guest on a New York City-based morning television program in 2007. Keith, I think it's Ablow, Ablow, a psychiatrist, author, and talk show host, was also on the program. Keith, who the previous year had invited others in the family to be on his show, commented that the jealousy inherent in plural marriage could be good if it served as motivation to take better care of yourselves and work at your relationship. In other words, if you put it to good use. While it helps to know that Joe loves us equally, it is my strong faith that brings me back from the destructive edge of jealousy. It's a constant inner directed labor to live this lifestyle, one that regularly pushes me out of my comfort zone. Because of the extra work it takes, I think my relationship with Joe is better than the relationship many of my monogamous, good gracious, friends have with their husbands. In fact, friends have told me that they're envious of the depth and richness of our relationship. I cherish that and certainly don't take it for granted. Many people's reactions to plural marriage could be summed up in one word: yuck. They assume the men are perverted or have a huge ego or are overly sexual. Quite the contrary. If a man has any of those characteristics, his plural relationships are not likely to last. I certainly wouldn't stay with Joe if he had any one of those traits. I'm not here to be a toy for a man, nor my sister wives. Most men don't enter this lifestyle so they can have more sex. Rather, they have a sincere sense of a higher purpose. I heard a comedian once say, any man who isn't married thinks, oh yeah, I'll take 3 wives. Polygamy sounds good. And any man who has a wife thinks, why would anyone in his right mind want more than one? I find that funny, but true, too, which adds to my respect for Joe and other men who live this way. I'd rather share Joe than have 100 men of a lesser quality to myself. I consider, Joe he just does something for these ladies. I said it. Joe is slick. Joe has game, okay? Joe, the way Joe swooped in on that other sister, Joe has game. Anyways, what was that last sentence? I consider Joe to be a monogamist. He is faithful to me and faithful to the people I expect him to be faithful to. I learned during my darkest times just what a gift this lifestyle can be. What I wanted most of my life was to be a mother, yet motherhood has turned out to be the very thing that has tested most women, and from the very beginning as a sister wife. We had been married only a month when Alina sat me down in the kitchen to give me the news. Guess what? She said, I'm expecting. I feigned a smile. That's great. Exciting. In reality, though, I was devastated. Alina wanted children as much as I did, and we hoped to have our first children as close together as possible. I was caught off guard that she was pregnant and I wasn't, and I was shocked by the range of emotions I felt at her announcement. As Alina's belly began to swell, I had to face her intimate relationship with Joe in a way I hadn't before. I tried not to let images of them together seep into my thoughts, but it was hard. It was one thing to consider their intimacy in the abstract, and altogether a different thing to experience it outwardly. As each month passed, I still hadn't conceived. I felt like a failure. After all, there clearly was nothing wrong with Joe. I tried to share my feelings with him, but he was just as thrilled as Alina about the baby that was on its way. And you should be too, Joe said encouragingly. Let me tell you something. You can sit there and plan all you want to have a baby. When it's time, it's just time. Because let me tell it wasn't my time. Because I was on birth control and I got pregnant. So I say that to say, I can see that she was sad and everything like that. And she wanted it when she wanted it. But it just wasn't time. The only thing that got me through my disappointment was a strong belief in what we were trying to do. I held fast to the thought that the family we'd long desired was now becoming a reality. And this would be a child I would love to. Alina invited me along to her prenatal appointments, and unexpectedly, I found it was just as exciting as she did to hear how the baby was progressing. We began planning for the birth together, shopping for baby clothes, toys, and educational games, and sharing ideas for a nursery. At yard sales, we bought children's books by the armload. With each passing month, I continued to worry I might never get pregnant, but I was such a part of Alina's pregnancy that I no longer resented the fact that she conceived so easily. About a month before her due date, a sign came that my prayers had been answered. It was Thanksgiving, and we were supposed to take mashed potatoes to the family dinner. I felt so nauseated that even preparing that mild dish was too much for me, so Alina took over the cooking duties. When we arrived at Joe's parents' home, the smell of the roast turkey made me so queasy that I just had to go outside for fresh air. Vicky, do you think you might be pregnant? Joe's mom asked me once I returned to the kitchen. Joe's mom is always on it. She got these people together, and now she's predicting this pregnancy. Joe's mom asked me once I returned to the kitchen. I suddenly realized I might be experiencing morning sickness, and I couldn't wait until the next day when the stores would reopen and I could get a home test that would confirm I was pregnant. Sure enough, I tested positive, and we were all thrilled. When Alina's baby was born, I thought I loved her son, Joseph, just as much as she did. When I had my son, Caleb, 7 months later, I realized that the connection between a mother and her own child was unlike anything else. As the years passed and our family grew, my ability to love my sister wife's children just like my own increased. And so did my love for Alina. We did everything together. If I went to see Mom, Alina and her kids came along too. If someone invited me on a picnic, it was understood we all would go together. We were inseparable, and it was thrilling to watch our family expand. That's not something that the Browns did. They did a lot of things separately. They did some things together, but they did, like visiting families, they did a lot of that separately. By the time Val joined us, I had 6 beautiful children and was well on my way to having the 10 children I'd always dreamed I would have. Oh, she likes being pregnant. Look, let me make this clear. I come from a large family, not my parents' generation. I think my parents' generation, the most anyone has is 5. But for my grandparents' generation, we're talking about 8 here, 15 there. Like they went all out. So I get it. People do it, but no, thank you. But suddenly it seemed I might never come close to realizing that hope. Motherhood, which had until then given me such joy, presented me with my greatest challenge, one that rocked my marriage to its core and tested my relationships with my sister wives in unexpected ways. After a 5-year break between pregnancies, I had trouble conceiving my 7th child and then had a miscarriage. I feared my childbearing days were over, but I finally got pregnant again. I was extremely excited at the prospect of once more being a mother to a newborn. My relationship with Joe was at an all-time high, and my interactions with Alina and Val flowed easily. My life seemed perfect. I really want to read more about what is said in their faith about children, because they all seem to want like large numbers of kids. So you know how like we hear that the three wives put you on a different level. I want to know if more children do that too. If you're familiar, let me know down in the comment section. I'm really interested. But something felt off right from the start about this pregnancy. My morning sickness, severe from the outset, never let up. I was plagued by constant headaches and exhaustion. A sweltering heat wave that summer made me feel miserable. I couldn't sleep at night because I was too hot. As a result, I was too tired to get up early enough to exercise, which always made me feel better during my pregnancies. The final link in the chain of consequences was that I gained weight, and it was all Joe's fault. Joe couldn't win no matter how hard he tried to meet my emotional or physical needs. As my due date approached, I was a mess, crying in private and standoffish in public. I wasn't sure I was capable of getting through the labor I knew laid ahead of me, or whether I would ever get over this attitude, this thing that seemed to have taken a hold of me. I couldn't stand myself, but that didn't keep me from lashing out at Joe, which added to our strained interactions. Our nights together were filled with tension, and instead of taking time to talk and connect, we would tumble into bed exhausted. It didn't help that as my relationship with Joe withered, his relationship with Alina blossomed. For the first time in my life, I wondered if I had the strength and staying power necessary for plural marriage. At the time, none of us understood pregnancy-related depression. Val had had a bout of postpartum blues, so she was best able to relate to what I was experiencing. I didn't recognize my symptoms as the same thing, however, nor did she. I was, after all, still pregnant. I was a grueling 10 days overdue when the labor began, and it was the roughest delivery I've experienced. The rigor of delivery led to a much slower recovery than I was used to. With my previous pregnancies, I stayed in or near bed for around 10 days, let my body rest, even though I felt good almost immediately. This time, I needed every minute of that and more. I felt helpless and incapable of rejoining my busy life, but Alina and Val were both working, and there were 8 little children at home who needed care around the house or help getting off to school. I kept telling everyone I couldn't handle it, that I was overwhelmed, but no one seemed to grasp my desperation. With no other options, I tried my best to step up. That's when my emotional spiral really began. I was on crazy train. Couldn't get off. I'd go to my closet to get dressed while the baby slept and end up on the floor crying for long periods of time. Every thought and emotion I had conflicted with one another. I didn't want Joe anywhere near me. I was upset when he stayed away. I knew something was wrong with me, but I wasn't able to accept any help or advice from my well-meaning mothers, sister, and sister wives. I wanted to get out of the house. I wanted to stay shut in so no one would see how much weight I gained. I wanted God's help, but I had hardly had time praying. I wallowed in self-pity, insecurity, confusion, and indecision. I crafted long emotional letters to Joe, but thankfully never gave him the worst ones, which were full of mean and nasty barbs. I thought seriously about moving with my children into a trailer on our property. If the mobile home hadn't needed so much fixing up, I might have gone for that informal separation. I lie in bed at night, my thoughts rolling. I get up and tend to the baby and then unable to get back to sleep. I stared into the darkness one night, thinking about how Val seemed emotionally distant for weeks after having her last baby. Yes, I had judged her at the time as ungrateful and self-absorbed. Why didn't she just get over the negative feelings and enjoy her good life? I'd wonder then. Now I was ashamed of myself, finally recognizing that she'd gone through something similar to what I was now experiencing. I got out of bed and made my way to Val's room, knocked softly at her door, and went in. I shook her awake. Val, I have to talk to you, I said. I'm so sorry I didn't understand what you were going through after your last birth, and I didn't try to understand. I had no idea. It's okay, Vicky, Val said. She sat up and I crawled into the bed next to her and poured out my feelings. I don't know if I could do this, I said. It's burying me. All my thoughts and feelings are irrational, but I don't know what to do to make them right. How did you do it? How did you get through it? Val listened, holding my hand as I cried quietly. I wish I can give you a simple answer, a formula. I can't. But Vicky, you will get through it. I did, she said. It's hard and it hurts. I know it feels crazy. I felt that way too. I wanted to curl up in my closet and hide from the world for a while. Over the next few months, I sought Val's comfort often when my swirling thoughts occurred, which were mostly about Joe, who I didn't think was taking my condition seriously enough, kept me awake at night. Val gave me encouragement and kept reminding me of things that had gotten better for her and how that gave me hope that I'd make it. Somehow, though, I just couldn't connect with Alina during those difficult months. I went to St. George one weekend, and while I was gone, she sent me text messages of encouragement and support, which only fueled my irrational anger. I didn't think she understood what I was going through at all. Joe would tell me how worried Alina was and how much she cared, and my unspoken reaction was, okay, so now she's a saint in your eyes, and I'm the devil? Great. The situation finally got bleak. So bleak that Joe confronted me, leading me to my bedroom one afternoon and shutting the door. As we sat down, he took my hand in his. Vicky, I'm really concerned about you, he said. I'm worried you might try to hurt yourself, and I'm concerned about our baby. Have you had any thoughts of wanting to hurt our son? Wow. I couldn't believe that he would even suggest such a thing. Joe, did I just soon throw you out the window right now, was what I was thinking. What a thing to ask me. But my baby is my only joy, the only thing getting me through every day, I said. So no, the answer is no. Boston is safe, but I'm not sure about us. I needed help, and I finally got it when I hit the bottom and looked at my family's advice to seek outside assistance. I began getting vitamin C shots weekly, started exercising again, and joined a support group for women from the polygamous culture. The therapist, who was not fundamentalist, helped me understand more fully how crippling pregnancy-related depression can be. She also helped me understand that my anger was sometimes justified through perhaps blown out proportion, but most important, she reminded me that there were physical explanations, a difficult labor, a prior miscarriage for the hormonal imbalance that was driving my depression and emotional upheaval. I wasn't crazy. As I emerged from under the blanket cloud, I realized how much hurt I had caused my family. I was humiliated by my behavior and spent a lot of time praying for forgiveness and the courage to apologize to Joe and Alina, who'd taken the brunt of my anger. In the end, what got me through this rough time was the steadfast devotion of my husband and my sister wives. They never gave up on me. They saw me at my worst and still loved me when I wasn't able to give my children all the attention they needed. Alina and Val were there to make sure that they were cared for and loved. Joe never stopped listening or walked away, even when my criticism stung. I came out of that experience more grateful than for my family and for the resilience of my relationships. Living in a couple's world, as I call it, makes our lives harder than if we were part of a community that accepts plural marriage, such as Arizona or Montana. But even in those communities, there are many different approaches to relationships, just as there are in monogamy. Some women have completely separate lives from their sister wives with very little interaction. Some live near each other but not together, and some live just like we do, all in one house. At the personal level, there are some women who have domineering personalities that affect their relationships with their spouse and sister wives, but alpha females who dominate relationships aren't exclusively found in polygamy. In our family, we don't have any sort of hierarchy among the wives. When Val came into the family, she instantly became a full equal partner. We've created a marriage that is a true collaboration, which ensures that our opinions are valued, our needs are met, and our lives are tightly linked together. Living the way we do all in one house can be stressful, no doubt about it. Did sharing a house with Alina and Val add to my struggles when I was deeply depressed? Maybe, but I also couldn't have survived that time without Val's support and understanding, or without Alina's unyielding patience, her help with my children, and her faith in me. It works for some people to live together, for some to be married, and for some to love another person of the same sex. None of those relationships is immune from the challenges we face in our family. But in this lifestyle, that works for me. The one I've chosen, the family structure that gives me the love and support I need. All right, y'all. I know this is deep in, but we only have one more person to go, so I'm going to finish. I may go over the hour mark. Feel free to pause it now. Okay, I'm definitely going over it now. Sorry. The next book, Vow. After I married Joe, I had to learn how Alina and Vicky interacted with each other and with him, and how I could fit in without stifling who I am. I discovered that the new arrangement was quite different from my first plural marriage, where there wasn't equality between the wives. When we lived in Mapleton, one of Donald's wives had a nicer, bigger bedroom, and he kept all of his personal belongings there. That meant he showered and got ready for the day in her room. The same wife also had a job as his secretary, and they drove to work together every day. It seemed she had everything, all his time and all his attention, and a greater influence on him. That's the bird. Maybe not the work part, but his workspace was at her home, and he did spend a lot of time there, which did created further division with Cody and his other wives. I was envious because I felt my relationship mattered less to him. Compounding that problem was the fact that there was generally a free-for-all in other areas, such as when we went somewhere together, there was a little effort at balance among and toward the sister wives. Usually, the last person to the car slipped into the front seat besides Donald. To grab that seat first would have been perceived as flagrantly selfish, which meant some wives were always trying to be the last out of the house. There was no equality among our various relationships, which contributed to the erosion of my bond with Donald and made it hard to trust that he had everyone's best interests at heart. I brought that attitude of mistrust along when I joined Joe's family. At first, it was really awkward for me when the four of us would go out together. I didn't know the protocol, so I simply followed the routine I was used to. When all of us wives were along, I would usually just get into the back seat, for example, even if it was my night to be with Joe. That's what I did one evening when we went to dinner, but it didn't feel right. I stressed out about it throughout the meal. On the ride home, backseat again. Joe must have sensed my frustration. When we got home, he asked us all to sit down in the living room. Obviously, Val is feeling uncomfortable and unsure about how to fit in, about who sits where and when, he said. We need to figure something out. I'm just trying to sort out how you guys do things, I said defensively. You clearly have some unwritten rules that I don't know about. We just always rotated, and that seemed to work out. But I see your point, Alina said. Vicky admitted she hadn't really thought about how to work a third person into this aspect of daily life. By the end of the night, we had a new plan. When it's one wife's night with Joe, she would sit by him in the car, at the restaurant, or wherever we happened to go that day. It may seem strange to have to discuss these details, but we learned that it helps us avoid a lot of confusion and insecurity. We also try to deal with our feelings head on. A couple of years after I married Joe, we were still adjusting as a family and had the added stress that comes with having 5 children becoming teenagers at once. We also were feeling financially pinched. Joe was changing careers again. Alina and Vicky were both working, and I was staying home with the children. Joe would come home after a long day of job hunting and head straight for the kitchen to chop vegetables, a task he found cathartic. Okay, Joe. Later, as we ate the stir fry he made for the 4 of us, we talk about our teenagers, our jobs, Joe's search for work, and how our newly blended family was coming together. We joked that it was our own little therapy group, and there was something to that. Those frequent discussions help us understand and draw closer to each other. When I see how hard Joe works at each of his relationships and how hard Vicky and Alina work at their individual relationships with him, I don't see any malicious intent to take something away from me. I don't feel like I'm getting only 1/3 of a man. Joe is there when I really need him every time. I don't feel I have to have him every minute of the day, but my time with him is precious. I try to clear everything else out of my schedule when it's my night so we can spend quality time together, reacquainting, reconnecting. I know my sister wives need the same quality time in their relationships with Joe, and I respect that need. Women who've never lived this way often focus on jealousy. Aren't you jealous of your sister wives? They'll ask. Of course I get jealous. I'm human. But I'm seeking an expanded heart and mind so that I'm able to want my sister wives to have as much happiness as I have. It's something I have to work at all the time. The consideration is just so much more in this family. I married into his family knowing that there were 2 other wives, and though Joe has spent countless hours talking to each of us through our emotional upsets, when I feel jealous or insecure, it's a problem that I have to take responsibility to resolve. One night, I really wanted Joe to help me sort through the insecurities I was feeling, but he had a date with Alina. I watched from the window as they drove off together, feeling very sorry for myself. Then I collapsed on my bed in tears. The next day, I treated Joe with indifference. I didn't want to see him or talk to him or even kiss him good morning. It hurt him, and I knew it. I was acting immature. I knew that if I needed him, all I had to do was say so, but I couldn't help it. I finally realized that the only person who could help me overcome these bad feelings was myself. Joe could love me, listen to me, and be supportive and understanding, but he couldn't stop me from having negative thoughts. I had to pick myself up and learn a better way of processing my feelings. That's that self-work that a lot of them talk about. What I have developed in my marriage to Joe is a sense of empowerment. I can speak my own mind, express my needs, and make my own decisions, including saying no without worry of any repercussions. That is not the case with Mr. Cody Brown. She can say no and not have to worry about Joe and what he's going to do next. I learned a lot about self-reliance from Joe's grandmother, Maureen Owen Barlow. She had 2 sister wives and moved constantly as her husband did his best to provide for his families. Grandmother Barlow had 13 children, one of whom died days after birth. During the early years of her marriage, she had to work incredibly hard to provide for herself and her children. Despite that, she felt she had everything she needed and was wary of expecting too much from her husband. I feel that that's one sacrifice a woman in this law must make, she said, referring to the principle. She should take care of herself and her children as much as possible. That's something a lot of people miss when they look at this lifestyle. It requires a willingness to take personal responsibility and accountability for yourself. I love growing up in a plural family, but those fond memories alone are not enough to carry me through the trials inherent in plural marriage. That's where my faith comes in. I wouldn't have chosen this lifestyle if I had not received a spiritual confirmation that it was right for me. I have to constantly examine my behaviors and my motives to see if I'm really working for the betterment of us all, which is how this lifestyle becomes a spiritual practice. So, in order for it to be a spiritual practice, all parties have to be considered. Y'all already know where I'm going with that, which is why the Browns, I don't think it was a spiritual practice to a certain extent, because it became more of a formality than them really working to be connected. They weren't turning to the word and doing different things the way it seems this family is. Y'all, sorry this chapter ran a little over. We are currently on page 185. And it looks like it officially ends at like we'll say 289. So we're halfway through. And I have to admit, I do like this book. And I can appreciate this different viewpoint of polygamy. Y'all let me know your thoughts down below. Please like, comment, and subscribe. And until next time.